Eleanor Ellie Vance, a renowned architect in her late 30s, felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The relentless deadlines, the constant client demands, and the simmering tension with her husband, Charles, had become a suffocating norm. Charles, a successful investment banker, was a man obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder, leaving little time or energy for anything else, including Ellie. Their once vibrant connection had faded into a lukewarm routine. They lived in a sprawling penthouse in Manhattan, a symbol of their success, but Ellie felt trapped in its gilded cage. Their marriage, once a source of joy and inspiration, had become a contractual obligation. They shared a bed, a life, but not a heart. The conversations were stilted, the intimacy routine. Ellie yearned for a spark, a feeling of being seen, of being truly loved. When the opportunity for a break presented itself, they seized it. It wasn't their usual structured, pre-planned getaway. This time, Charles had booked a 2-week vacation at a luxurious resort on the Amalfi Coast, a place Ellie had always dreamed of visiting. It was supposed to be a rekindling journey, a chance to rediscover the couple they used to be. Along with them came their longtime household manager, Daniel, a quiet and reliable young man in his late 20s. He had been with them for over 5 years and was as much a fixture in their lives as the furniture. Daniel was discreet, efficient, and incredibly hardworking. Ellie had always considered him a friend, a safe presence in her often chaotic world. He rarely took time for himself and readily agreed when Charles suggested he come along. Charles, ever the pragmatist, saw this as an opportunity to ensure everything ran smoothly. He didn't perceive Daniel as a friend. He was just an essential cog in the Vance household machine. The journey began with a sense of optimistic anticipation. The private jet touched down in Naples, and the warm Mediterranean air caressed their faces. As they were driven along the winding coastal roads, the breathtaking beauty of the Amalfi Coast unfolded before them. The azure sea, the pastel-colored villages clinging to the cliffs, the lemon groves. It was like stepping into a postcard. They checked into their suite at the Hotel Splendido, a jewel perched atop a cliff with panoramic views of the coast. Ellie was immediately captivated by the sheer magic of the place. That first day was filled with the promise of better days. They had a leisurely lunch at the hotel's terrace restaurant, overlooking the sea. Charles, surprisingly, seemed to be making an effort. He made small talk about their upcoming excursions, a boat trip to Capri, visits to Positano and Ravello. Daniel, as always, kept a respectful distance, but Ellie could see the genuine appreciation in his eyes as he observed the breathtaking view. They dined together in the evening, the candlelight reflecting in their faces, the soft music creating a romantic ambience. However, as the days passed, Charles's initial enthusiasm began to wane. Charles, it seemed, could not completely detach himself from his professional life. He spent hours on his laptop, attending conference calls, and obsessing over market trends. Ellie often found herself alone, wandering the hotel gardens, reading on the terrace, or simply staring at the sea. Her initial optimism began to fade, replaced by a familiar sense of loneliness. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to notice her quiet disquiet. He would politely offer to take her to the town, to explore local sites. He was always respectful, but his presence was comforting. He had a quiet charm, a genuine interest in her well-being, that Charles had long since seemed to abandon. During those walks, they began to talk more, not just about logistics or household matters. They discussed their interests, their passions, their dreams. Ellie discovered a sensitive, intelligent, and articulate soul beneath Daniel's quiet exterior. Daniel shared his love for photography, his dream of capturing the beauty of the world through his lens. Ellie confessed her frustrations with the monotony of her life, her yearning for something more. Their conversations were like a breath of fresh air, liberating and rejuvenating. They talked for hours, losing track of time, and in their words and shared glances, a deep connection began to bloom. It started innocently enough, a friendship born of mutual respect and understanding. But as the days passed, their interactions became tinged with a subtle, unspoken tension. They started spending more time together, often on impromptu excursions to local villages, hidden coves, and scenic viewpoints. One afternoon, while Charles was buried in his work, Ellie and Daniel decided to explore the historic town of Amalfi. They strolled through the narrow cobblestone streets, admiring the colorful buildings and the vibrant atmosphere. They shared stories about their families, their childhoods, their aspirations. Ellie was struck by how easily she could talk to Daniel. He understood her, listened to her, and made her feel seen in a way that Charles hadn't in years. In the evenings after dinner, Ellie often found herself drawn to the terrace, where Daniel would be quietly reading or sketching. They'd start with casual conversations, but soon those conversations turned into deeper, more personal exchanges. It was in those quiet moments, under the soft glow of the moon, that she realized how much she enjoyed his company, how much he made her feel alive. She found herself looking forward to these moments, craving his presence, his attention. The simple camaraderie was evolving into something much more complex. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky with vibrant hues of orange and pink, Daniel shared a story about his grandmother, a woman who had instilled in him a love for life and a deep appreciation for beauty. Ellie was deeply touched by his sensitivity, his depth of feeling. She began to see him in a new light, no longer just the quiet, efficient household manager, but a complex individual with a rich inner life. As the days turned into nights, Ellie's sense of unease around Charles intensified. He was oblivious to her growing emotional distance, caught up in his world of finance and deadlines. She felt invisible, alone even when they were in the same room. Meanwhile, her connection with Daniel deepened. They were like two magnets, drawn to each other by an invisible force. The stolen glances, the subtle touches, the shared laughter, became increasingly charged with an unspoken intensity. One evening, after a long day of exploring the coast, they found themselves sitting on a secluded part of the beach, the gentle waves lapping at the shore. Charles was, as usual, immersed in a video conference. The air crackled with unspoken words and feelings. Daniel turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. He reached out and gently took her hand. It was an innocent gesture, but to Ellie, it was like an electric shock. The world seemed to stop, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, alone on the beach. "Are you happy, Ellie?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper, but his words resonating deeply within her. The question struck her like a lightning bolt. She realized, with a jolt of recognition, that she was not. The life she had built with Charles, the success she had achieved, felt hollow, lacking the genuine connection she craved. Daniel continued, his voice gentle and sincere. He spoke of his own uncertainties, his own dreams, and his desire to live a life filled with passion and meaning. His words stirred something deep within her. She had never felt this understood, this seen. In that moment, amidst the darkness and the gentle sound of the waves, something shifted. Daniel leaned closer, and their eyes met. There was an undeniable pull between them. He gently cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a kiss filled with both longing and hesitation. It was a kiss that shattered the boundaries they had carefully built, a kiss that opened a door to a world of forbidden desires. She knew it was wrong, knew the consequences, but in that moment, she couldn't resist. The pull was too strong. The following days became a whirlwind of stolen moments and clandestine meetings. Every time Charles was occupied with work, Ellie and Daniel would find ways to be together, their attraction intensifying with each passing encounter. Their conversations deepened. Their touches became more intimate, their feelings increasingly difficult to ignore. It felt like they were living in a dream, a world where their desire was the only reality. They explored the coast on a vintage Vespa, the wind whipping through their hair as they zipped through the winding roads. They swam in hidden coves, their laughter echoing across the crystalline waters. They shared picnics under the shade of lemon trees, their hands brushing against each other as they reached for a piece of bread or a glass of wine. They were living a life of secret exhilaration, a world away from the mundane routine of their everyday existence. One afternoon, they decided to venture to a secluded beach, a place Daniel had discovered years ago during a solo trip. It was a hidden paradise, with soft white sand, clear turquoise waters, and lush vegetation. They spent the afternoon swimming, sunbathing, and laughing, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing moment. It felt like time had stopped, like they were the only two people in the world. Later that evening, as they sat on the beach, wrapped in towels, Daniel confessed his feelings. He spoke of how her presence had changed his world, how she had shown him what it meant to truly connect with someone. He spoke of the depth of his admiration, his desire for her, a desire he knew he had no right to feel. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest. She had never experienced such raw honesty, such passion. She, too, confessed her feelings, her attraction, her longing. It was as if they were peeling back layers of their souls, revealing their innermost selves to each other. They knew they were playing with fire, but they couldn't stop themselves. The allure of the forbidden was too intoxicating, the emotional connection too profound. They were caught in a web of desire, a world where their feelings were the only guiding force. Back at the hotel, the guilt began to gnaw at Ellie. She would look at Charles, so absorbed in his work, so oblivious to the emotional turmoil she was experiencing, and a wave of regret would wash over her. She knew what she was doing was wrong, that she was betraying his trust, but the pull of her emotions was so strong that she felt powerless to resist. She was living a double life, one where she was the dutiful wife, and another where she was consumed by her passion for Daniel. The tension between Ellie and Daniel grew, their secret encounters more frequent, their emotions more intense. Each stolen glance, each whispered word, each accidental touch, was a reminder of the forbidden nature of their relationship, a constant source of both exhilaration and torment. One evening after dinner, Charles announced that he had to attend an important video conference, which would last late into the night. Ellie, who had hoped to spend a quiet evening with him, felt a pang of disappointment. Daniel, sensing her unease, suggested a walk on the beach. They slipped away unnoticed, the darkness providing a cloak of anonymity. Under the silvery glow of the moon, they talked, their words filled with the weight of their unspoken desires. They knew that what they were doing was wrong, that their relationship had no future, but their feelings were too powerful to deny. They walked hand in hand, their fingers intertwining, their bodies close enough to feel the warmth of each other's skin. Then it happened. They reached a secluded spot, away from the gaze of prying eyes. They stopped, their breath catching in their throats. Daniel looked at Ellie, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and longing. They kissed, a kiss filled with passion, desperation, and a hint of regret. The kiss escalated, and soon they were making love on the sand, under the silent witness of the stars. It was an act of surrender, a moment of pure, unadulterated passion, but also a moment of profound transgression. Afterward, as they lay there, wrapped in each other's arms, the reality of their actions began to sink in. The guilt was overwhelming, the sense of betrayal all-consuming. Ellie knew she had crossed a line, a point of no return. She looked at Daniel, his face etched with a mixture of love and despair, and realized that their world had irrevocably changed. The once innocent friendship had transformed into a complicated, messy, and dangerous affair. She was torn between her love for Daniel and her loyalty to Charles, a conflict that threatened to tear her apart. As the end of their vacation drew near, Ellie's anxiety grew. Charles, sensing her distance, started making efforts to reconnect, a gesture that only intensified her guilt. Every moment spent with him felt like a betrayal to Daniel. Every moment spent with Daniel felt like a betrayal to Charles. She was trapped in a web of deceit, a world of conflicting emotions. One evening, after an awkward dinner, Charles approached Ellie, his face etched with worry. He confessed that he felt she was distant, that something had changed. He asked her what was wrong, pleading with her to open up to him. Ellie tried to deflect his questions, to feign normality, but her efforts were futile. Charles pressed on, his tone becoming increasingly urgent. The confrontation escalated, with Charles expressing his concerns, his doubts, his sense of growing disconnection. It was a moment of reckoning, a time for truth. Ellie knew she could no longer hide her feelings, that she had to face the consequences of her actions. She looked at Charles, his face filled with hurt and confusion, and began to tell him everything: the unspoken feelings, the secret meetings, the clandestine encounters, the passion and the guilt. She poured out her heart, the tears streaming down her face as she confessed her betrayal. Charles listened in stunned silence, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. The world he had believed in, the life he had built, was crumbling before his eyes. He was hurt, betrayed, and angry, but there was also a flicker of sadness in his eyes, a sense of having failed his wife. He didn't scream, he didn't shout, he simply listened, his face growing paler with each passing word. When Ellie finally finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Charles rose from the chair, his face unreadable. He simply walked out of the room, leaving Ellie alone, with her confession hanging in the air. She knew she had hurt him deeply, that their relationship would never be the same. The world she knew had been shattered, the future uncertain. The remaining days of their vacation were filled with tension and discomfort. Charles and Ellie barely spoke to each other, their interactions strained and awkward. The air was thick with unspoken words, regret, and a deep sense of loss. The beautiful surroundings seemed to mock their emotional turmoil, the breathtaking views failing to provide any solace. Ellie and Daniel avoided each other, their stolen glances filled with both longing and despair. They knew that their secret relationship was over, that their world was about to change forever. The shared laughter, the stolen kisses, the passionate encounters, were now just memories, ghosts of a forbidden love that could never be. One evening, just before they were scheduled to leave, Ellie went to the beach, hoping to find some peace amidst the emotional chaos. She was met by Daniel, who had been waiting for her. They talked, their voices hushed, the setting sun painting the sky with hues of orange and red. Daniel confessed his love for her, his heartbreak over their situation, but also his understanding of the need to separate, to go their separate ways. He knew that their relationship could never flourish in the shadows, that it was not built on a foundation of truth and integrity. They embraced, a long, lingering hug that was filled with both love and sorrow. They promised each other that they would never forget what they had shared, the passionate connection that had briefly lit up their lives. But they also acknowledged that their paths were diverging, that they had to say goodbye, not just to each other, but to the world they had briefly created together. The plane ride back to New York was long and arduous, each mile seeming to stretch into eternity. Ellie was filled with a mixture of guilt, regret, and a strange sense of liberation. She had destroyed her marriage, betrayed her husband, and broken the rules of her life. But she had also found a part of herself that had been lost, a part that yearned for love, passion, and genuine connection. Back in their Manhattan apartment, everything felt different. The walls seemed to close in on Ellie, the silence deafening. The life she had built with Charles felt alien, the routines and rituals empty. The apartment, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a prison, a monument to a broken marriage. The days that followed were difficult, a constant reminder of the mistakes she had made. Charles moved into the guest room, their marriage teetering on the brink of collapse. Ellie was filled with remorse, but also with a quiet resolve to face the consequences of her actions. She knew that she had to find a way to heal, to rebuild her life, and to learn from her mistakes. One evening, as they were sorting through their belongings, Charles approached Ellie, his face calmer than she had seen it since the confession. He proposed that they seek professional help, that they give their marriage a fighting chance. He was hurt, betrayed, but he was also willing to put in the effort, to try and rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Ellie agreed, recognizing that this was the first step toward healing, the only chance for their relationship to survive. They started attending couples therapy sessions, a journey that was both painful and cathartic. They talked about their past, their present, and their hopes for the future. They delved into the depths of their emotions, their fears, and their insecurities. It was a long and arduous process, filled with tears, anger, and moments of profound vulnerability. Daniel, meanwhile, had decided to take some time off to travel and to focus on his passion for photography. He sent a brief email to Ellie, expressing his well wishes and his hope for her happiness. They agreed not to contact each other, to allow time and distance to heal their wounds. It was a difficult decision, but one they both knew was necessary. Over time, Ellie and Charles started to communicate more openly and honestly, their conversations more meaningful and heartfelt. They began to understand each other's needs, their fears, and their desires. They worked to rebuild the trust that had been broken, brick by brick, through patience, understanding, and a genuine commitment to each other. The scars of the past remained, but they had learned to accept them, to see them as reminders of their mistakes, but also of their resilience. Ellie began to channel her energy into her work, finding new inspiration and passion in her designs. She also rediscovered her love for reading, her passion for art, and her desire to connect with the world around her. She started spending more time with her friends, reigniting old relationships and building new connections. Years later, Ellie and Charles were still together, their relationship stronger and more meaningful than ever before. They had learned to communicate openly and honestly, to appreciate each other's strengths and weaknesses, and to cherish the moments they had together. The affair had been a turning point in their lives, a catalyst for growth, transformation, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly love and be loved. The scars of the past were still there, but they had become a part of their story, reminders of the challenges they had overcome. They had learned that relationships required constant work, communication, and a willingness to forgive and be forgiven. They had also learned that love was not just a feeling, but a choice, a commitment to each other through the good times and the bad. Ellie never forgot Daniel, their connection forever etched in her heart. She occasionally wondered where he was, what he was doing, and how he was doing. But she also knew that their paths had diverged for a reason, that their relationship was destined to remain a memory, a beautiful, heartbreaking reminder of a love that could never be. Looking back on the Emerald Coast rendezvous, Ellie realized that the experience, despite its pain and turmoil, had been a necessary part of her journey. She had made mistakes, she had hurt the people she loved, but she had also discovered her own strength, her own resilience, and her own capacity for love and forgiveness. She had emerged from the ashes of her broken marriage, not as the same person she had been before, but as a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate version of herself. She had learned that sometimes, the most challenging experiences can be the catalyst for the most profound transformation, that it is often in the darkest moments that we find the light that illuminates our path. She had embraced her journey, the good and the bad, the successes and the failures, and was finally living a life that was authentic, meaningful, and filled with a love that was both genuine and enduring.